thank you to all the speakers for delivering a great overview of the company. Now we'll take questions from our covering analysts, who we thank for joining us today. And I'm going to shift it over to you, Rule, to bridge the analysts in, please.
Thank you. And as a reminder, if you wish to ask a question, simply press star then the number one on your telephone keypad. Your first question is from the line of Jeff Van Rhee. Your line is open.
Jeff, you there? Sounds like we might have a problem with the connection. Maybe we need to come back.
Can you hear me here?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the line there, but anyway, appreciate it. Thanks for the day and thanks for the insight. Super helpful. I wanted to use my one question here and focus on AMS. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think yet a lot of confusion. So you touched on PSEG. Who did you compete with there? Who did you displace? And then maybe just a little more context. Like when you're in there pitching, who are you seeing typically? But also, how many customers do you have on the product now? And then I think, Seth, on the last call, you talked a little bit about your learnings on the product. I also think it'd be helpful to expand on that. What have you learned early on in the product? So maybe just a little more clarity with success, competitive landscape, and learnings, those three things.
Sure. I'm going to have Seb talk in a minute about the competitive landscape and a little bit about PSEG and what he believes he can disclose there for an active client. But we certainly, as we mentioned on the last earnings call, the learnings as we've rolled out, and as everyone knows, we're a very cautious company, a very methodical introductions of new products. And we've learned a lot about the way that clients are thinking about value and about outcomes. And we started off as a company that was offering 50% off of vendor pricing. And you're watching us evolve quite a bit into a value-based sales model where, for example, on our AMS products, we don't guarantee any percentage off of their current spend. We instead, from the ground up, design a bespoke operation and execution plan that's going to get them the results that they want, the outcomes that they want. And in some cases, we are charging the clients more than they were paying their prior vendor. But because the outcomes are better, the total return on value and spend is much higher. So this is a big shift, Jeff, in terms of the way that Rimini Street sort of has moved from that 50% off company to really being about value delivered in its pricing. And this will allow gross margin expansion going forward, will allow us to have longer term, bigger contracts across a wider scope of services. So let me turn it over to Sebastian to talk to you a little bit more specifically around PSEG, who we competed against, and how that strategy played out.
At PSEG, their chief information officer noticed after about a year of our SAP maintenance replacement service that their existing AMS provider was throwing all the hard questions over the fence to us. And he asked me, why are we paying for two companies here? Why don't you guys get into the AMS business and make that a service offering? And the existing provider was a typical over $10 billion revenue systems integrator who had been in place at PSEG for 10 years. And they didn't dislike them. They were just wondering if there was a better way. And within 6 months of Rimini Street taking over AMS support, we got the open caseload under 100 open cases. And we solved over 10,000 incidents and cases for them in the AMS service. Now, some of these cases are very simple, like resetting your password, things like that. and some are very complex, and they come bundled with X number of hours of consulting as well. So that was really the story at PSEG. And since then, one thing I want to talk about that PSEG and Rimini Street loves is that we are identifying the root cause of these issues and making them go away permanently. We believe the systems integrator existing model is a body shop, pay by the drink type of model where they want the number of incidents or cases to go up every year so they make more money.
Thank you, Seth.
Definitely helpful. Maybe if I could just sneak one other follow-up in there. In terms of Seth, with respect to the pipeline and closures so far, can you put any finer point around how many people you have on AMS and kind of the growth of the pipeline specifically for that product?
Well, I think as we had talked on the last earnings call, and because we can't get into the Q4, we're right in that period. A few weeks you saw we're going to announce Q4 earnings and full year on March 3rd. What I can tell you at a high level is that we continue to build pipe. We continue to hone our expertise in the global rollout and sales of the AMS product. And as I mentioned, Jeff, the complexity of switching from a 50% off model to a very different sales motion is complicated in a sales force. And as Gerard laid out, we've built these overlay sales models now where we have specialists in AMS, we have specialists in support, we have specialists in security. This is a new sales construct for us. We are already out there using it. We've been building out all these resources. And we now have the infrastructure in place to get the global sales underway. We're already seeing it. We're seeing it in proposals. We're seeing it in pipe. As the sales team becomes more comfortable in presenting and competing against the SIs, a whole different set of competitors than the vendors that we fight on the support side. So it is a pretty complicated rollout, which is why started with Vision in 2015, began launching in 18 after 3 years of preparation. And now you watched us. We have active, live, successful clients over a year on these platforms, and they're giving us great feedback. They love the service. We've honed the service as part of our learnings. We figured out what customers really want and the value that they want to see. And now we're taking it out on a global basis. So all of the movements are positive in the right direction. And that's why you watch us very conservatively commit about how much. We say that this is going to be meaningful in 2021, but not necessarily material when you think about that as a 10% part of revenue as we grow our support service revenue at the same time.
Yeah, well, and certainly compelling what you laid out with respect to the gross margin and the cost of delivery benefits of layering the services on top of each other. So, again, I know there are a lot of questions. I appreciate it. Sorry for the phone line snafus getting in there, but I do appreciate you doing the day and for answering the questions.
Technical world we live in these days. We're all dealing with bandwidth and challenges. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Take care.
Thanks.
Your next question is from the line of Derek Wood. Sir, your line is open.
Great. Thanks, and well done on a broad layout of the business. Very informative, and great to hear from a number of executives at the company. My first topic I wanted to drill into was on the go-to-market structure, and I guess that's for Seth or Gerard.
Yep, we'll grab Gerard and fire away, Derek.
So first on the 3 regional hires, just wanted to hear about kind of the leadership skills or the experience that they bring that you think can up-level the execution in the U.S. and the growth in the U.S. And then I was just wondering how significant of a shift this new structure is for CSMs to drive more expansion out of the installed base and versus maybe AEs being responsible for it, and the changes in comp plans and kind of what's going to be incremental here that you hadn't focused on before.
Okay, so the leadership skills that they bring, if you look at the profile of the three we hired in North America, is a combination of things. First of all, they have an experience of both, smaller companies and companies at scale. I mean, two of them come from big companies like IBM for one of them, and Dell EMC for the other. So they know what it takes to be able to accelerate growth at scale at a bigger size company. That's one thing. The second piece is that the three of them have been in general manager's role before, and it's a little bit of a different mindset. And I know general managers in some companies mean a lot of different things, but what we need here is people with strong understanding of sales, but not necessarily just sales leader. People that can actually drive defining strategy for their own market and their region. So great understanding of the depth of that particular region. And if you look at the three regional GMs that we've hired, they've been in those regions in their past experiences and in their past companies. So they know their market very well. They can articulate proactively, strategically, how we can actually capture the opportunities there. And then they have a big execution skill set from, how to drive the marketing plans, field marketing and lead generation to sales, obviously, but they also have, and they've done that in the past, manage client success, organization or client engagement organization. So that very well-rounded type of experience is what we've brought in. That gives us, in the past, we never had that in North America. And we had sales leader. When I joined back in June, I had sales leaders reporting to me, and nobody really looking at it from a holistic end-to-end perspective. So that's to the first question. To the second question, we've had AEs and we've had so-called enterprise account managers. But the way that the enterprise account managers were compensated and the way their goals were set was on a pure, non-renewal target. So even kind of, prevents revenue from leaving us. What we're shifting here is that we're turning that back to the positive, which is A, on the retention, not on the non-retention, and B, is adding a new sales into those existing clients to their compensation model. So it is a change, but it is a change that some of them have already started to kind of get acquainted to, and they're going to work very closely, even more closely with the AEs especially in the growing of those accounts. And by the way, not just with the AEs, as I mentioned earlier, we're building those one team account plans, which I believe are really critical to really understand clients from an end-to-end perspective. So working with delivery to understand the current satisfaction, the current pain points we're seeing with tickets that are being loaded, with marketing to be able to have account-based marketing very tailored to the needs, obviously to sales, but also to our lead generation engine, our inside sales team.
Great, that's very helpful color. Michael, I on the long-term targets, very helpful to get those laid out. Was hoping to double click on a couple items, and it may be early, but in terms of that $1 billion revenue goal, any color in terms of mix targets of kind of core subscription versus AMS and non-subscription services. And then in terms of the net revenue retention rates, you've been around 92%, given the new efforts on cross-sell, upsell. Any thoughts on how much that could be lifted long term?
So from a model perspective, Derek, your hunch is correct. We'd rather not go into, and it is early, into an overall mix. Nonetheless, as you've heard, we have a compelling plan, a compelling value proposition in place that it undeniably is going to be a key driver of our growth in getting us to the $1 billion objective in 26. What was the second question again? Apologies.
Just the ability to increase that net revenue retention rate and how much leverage maybe could be there.
Yeah. So I would highlight our solution-based offering. in increasing the lifetime value of customers. That is what, as we execute, once again, on our compelling value proposition, our solution based, solving problems, the unlimited approach, that's where we believe you're going to see that metric over time improve.
Okay,
And
yeah,
Derek,
those will be
Seth
good
joining in here.
KPIs to watch.
Yeah, Derek, I was just going to add that we're probably looking at a few percentage points over time, just because of, as Michael said, if you're taking an average lifetime today, which from an accounting point of view we have to come up with one, and it's determined to be around between 4 and 5 years today. Our goal, as we had mentioned on prior earnings call, was to get that to 10 years, to double that amount. If you look at what we're offering here, someone who buys AMS is also going to buy the support, because we require them to be in place together as part of this model and the way the financial model works to drive an expanded gross margin. So that's going to bring along longer periods of time that a customer will remain on a platform. And we would expect, if you think about that, going from 5 years to 10 years. It may take us several years to get there, but the AMS is a critical part of that extension of the lifetime value plus the expanded footprint. I think you could see several points of improvement on that revenue retention rate.
Great. And Seth, I just wanted to throw one more at you. I mean, it was interesting to see that 86% market share number. Nice to quantify that, at least according to your analysis. I mean, what is it that's given you this big competitive moat to 15 years later to have that kind of market share? Thanks, and thanks for taking my questions.
Sure. So Derek, I think the answer comes to if you look at us versus our closest competitor, the fact that we're probably 10 times bigger. We have hundreds and hundreds of global engineers. They don't have anywhere near that scale. And we're the only ones at scale that can compete with Oracle and SAP for the largest infrastructure in the world. And this is attributable to, I believe, our strategy going back 15 years. We set out a strategy to be a global player. We made investments in building global operations when other people thought, why don't you just focus on North America? And they really didn't understand that we knew, because of our experience in enterprise software, we supported and worked with the largest companies in the world. We understood that if we didn't have the global infrastructure in place to support a large global entity operating around the world, that we wouldn't be able to win those big global contracts. The contracts like Hyundai, where we have 44 separate contracts in different countries to cover that huge global infrastructure. These companies liked what we were doing years ago, but they didn't think we had the scale or capability to support something of that size. Now we do. We've got the critical mass, we've got the capability, the 24/7, the follow the sun support. All that infrastructure we invested in over the years, we made those investments, and now we're in a position to reap the benefits of those investments. And that's why going forward, you're not seeing us talk about taking down gross margin. We backed it down a couple points, as you saw over the last couple of years, to deal with the AMS rollout and the infrastructure investments. But you're not hearing us talk about major investments that we need going forward that have any impact on these numbers. We're now in a position to reap the benefits of the investments we've made over the last few years. And it's because we've made those long-range investments in a very methodical, strategic way. That's why we're 10 times bigger than our closest competitor. And that competitor is several times bigger than the one behind. And this is why when you look at Gartner's numbers, we come in at about 86%. And we'll see where we wind up after fiscal 2020 results and they get recalibrated again. But I think this puts us in a very market dominant position.
Thanks. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
Your, your next question is from the line of Richard Baldry. Your line is open.
If I think about the first half of 2020, I feel like prospects or customers alike were likely very focused on short-term work from home and just basic survival given obvious challenges in COVID in the year. I'm curious if you look at sort of the second half, and looking forward, maybe if you've seen any meaningful changes to the demand environment, their pipeline or sales cycle changes, as people really come to grips with sort of weakened macro challenges, looking for cost savings in different areas of their budgeting, et cetera, if that's had a meaningful effect or you start to feel that coming out. Thanks.
Sure, Rich. One of the things I think that, as you saw in the third quarter, when we had a very strong billings number coming off of a couple quarters where we had some challenges with retention and renewal because clients just couldn't even afford to pay their bills. There was a big cash crunch at the early half of the year as businesses were closed and things were locked down. No one knew where they were going. Towards the back half of the year, I think you saw in the third quarter, was that we were in a position where companies were starting to deal with the present emergency. They were starting to find their new footing, and Rimini Street was a very big part. You look at the number of transactions in the third quarter, we were setting new records, and all of that, I think, was a reflection of moving from the emergency knee-jerk situation of the pandemic in the first half, learning how to work with that environment because people had to, and then turning to Rimini Street as a solution to a lot of those challenges. Whereas we've always talked about, we are a really good solution in the best of times because IT departments never have the budget. No matter how good a company is doing, they never have enough budget to do all the projects that the company needs done. And so Rimini Street's always an opportunity. When things get tight and cash gets tight and budgets need to be cut, and priorities need to be set, Rimini Street shines even more because all the reasons we're good during the good times were even more effective during downturns and challenging times. And I think that was reflected in the third quarter results. And as I said at the time on the earnings call, we were seeing in the back half of the year the largest pipelines in the company's history. And I think, we expect that, as the pandemic continues and goes on, and we know there's another year left here, at least of impact to the global economy, we think Rimini Street is, again, well positioned to play a strategic role in more companies, situations and strategies than ever. And as Sebastian Grady showed during the case studies, we have a lot of different ways that we can approach all these different industries. We can play a role.
And just a small one, but your EMEA and US regions now have multiple sort of GMs kind of running them. I'm curious, it looked like from the slide that Europe was really run under one. Do you think that'll change over the year ahead and be a multi-GM sort of strategy, or is there a reason that it's better under a unified structure? Thanks.
Actually, we are separated with Israel and Eastern Europe just for purposes of simplicity. On the slide, we just brought EMEA together. That's our own construct due to differences in operations between the Middle East, Israel, and other components of Eastern Europe. But I'm going to turn it over to Gerard, and he can elaborate further on the global GM structure.
Yes, thanks, Seth. So, EMEA has been in the past 2.5 years kind of a little bit of a turnaround, as I'm sure you've seen. And so, we're getting, back on good growth here. And I think the structure that we have today does not, justify having multiple GMs when you look at the size of EMEA. For the future, I can't predict what the future is going to look like. And as we grow to $1 billion by 2026, obviously we're reconsidering those structures, and as countries become bigger and bigger, then we'll always be on the lookout to see if we need to implement a more at the country level type of GM structure for EMEA, for example. So again, to be seen as we grow to 2026 and how the market evolves and how our revenue evolves there. I think for North America, as I mentioned, this is the biggest region for us, and we felt having only one GM over all of North America will not allow us to have that in-depth understanding of that region, and would then rely too much again on each of the functional leaders to be able to do that without one person responsible for really understanding that particular region. So that's why we took a little bit of a different approach in North America than we have in EMEA. And you can see Asia Pacific is actually the same model, right? We don't believe that having a Asia Pacific leader brings enough closeness to the different countries, and each of those countries have their own growth and their own size, and it's proven to be pretty successful for us in Asia Pacific to have that model.
Thanks, and thanks for the informative update.
Rich?
Your next question is from the line of Brian Kinstlinger. Your line is now open.
Hi, great. Thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear
Sure
you.
can.
Thanks, Brian.
Great. I got two go-to-market questions and then one numbers question. As you pitch new business, what are prospective clients saying, and how big a part does the Oracle litigation play in the decision process since the latest judgments were handed down?
Well, sure. It doesn't come up nearly as much. I mean, if you look at 15 years, we were already getting complaints from Oracle early on. I think within the first few weeks after we launched the company in 2005, it didn't result to a hot war litigation until 2010. But we were sparring for 5 years before we ever had hot litigation. Meanwhile, we grew and we were accelerating growth all the way through it. I think the difference today, Brian, is that most people recognize that this lawsuit is out there. And I think as Dan Winslow had in his first slide, all you have to do is contrast. We continue to grow, add Oracle customers by the hundreds, larger and larger Oracle customers, revenues continue to grow, all the while separate from the fact that the litigation moves forward in the background. And I think that's really the story here. We've continued to grow through it. We spend $10, $12 million a year on litigation. But as Dan pointed out, again, if you were Uber and Airbnb, you've got hundreds of litigations you're battling to get your product into market. We spend 10 to 12 million a year to open up a $180 billion TAM. We see it as just the investment we have to pay. We have to go through this court process. It's important. We take it seriously, and we're going to work our way, believe, through it in the coming years. I think this is just something that continues to live out there. It does create some friction in some accounts. And as we've discussed many times, there are accounts that won't move to Rimini Street because we're in litigation with Oracle. Not just because we're in litigation, but it's who we're in litigation against, and they just don't want to get anywhere near it. But I think as we've grown larger and larger, and people realize that this is not an existential battle for the company. A lot of people in Rimini 1 before 2015 sometimes thought that it was really either you were going to win or you were going to lose, and Rimini Street was either going to survive or not survive. That's not how things are looked at today. We're a multi-$100 million business. When Oracle and us went to war in 2010, I think we were $20 million in revenue. So we're a different scale today. We've got large global reserves in terms of cash. We are just a much bigger organization, and the battles we're fighting are over how we do the support on certain product lines of Oracle's. It's not anything to do, as we mentioned, with the legality of our overall business. So we don't think that existential threat is there. And we think that the customers recognize that. And that's why we're able to take on these huge, large global customers.
Great. One more on the delivery side. On AMS, and I may have missed it, is delivery domestic? Is there an offshore component? And if it is all domestic, is there a plan for global delivery? And then in addition to that, you made it clear that it's hurt the margins early on. Where are they today for AMS, the gross margin, and where do you see it ultimately?
Sure. Let me answer the first part, and then I'll turn it over to Brian Slepko here to talk about his global delivery model. The margins we set out, we're a 60% plus type gross margin, as you know, historically over the last quarters. We've been a 60% range for a while now. The AMS business might be in the mid 40s coming out of the gate. But I think as we tried to explain in Brian's presentation, we have an unusual situation because even though the service itself might be mid 40s kind of out of the gate, what it's doing is it's allowing us to save money and resources on the support side, which are more expensive because you have both services combined as a requirement. And what it's allowing us to do is shift more work from support down to the lower cost AMS, which means our support revenues are going up in terms of gross margin. And that equals out. So you take the 45%, you get a higher than 60% on support. And that's why it evens itself out. And we would expect that with those services combined, we're still looking at a mid 60s gross margin profile on a combined basis by mid 2025, 26 range. Okay. So with that, Brian, why don't you talk a little bit about your global delivery model?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. We certainly are building out a global delivery model. And I think, one of the things that Seth had mentioned earlier is some of the learnings we've had as we've gone through this AMS adventure, right? A lot of it, clients' needs are different based on that client, right? Some clients are very specific in where we can have resources. Some are less so. Some want them on site. So our current strategy is to build a global infrastructure to allow us to support all of that. For instance, we're supporting PSE&G primarily out of Brazil, right? So we've got a big AMS team in Brazil. We're also building a really strong team out of India to support those clients where we can use Indian resources. We've also got people that potentially could be on site, although we prefer not to do that. We've got people in local locales as well as need be. So we're modeling it very much based on how we're doing the support piece of it, a global infrastructure to allow us to support any combination that clients need.
Great. I've got one last question. You had a slide on how to reaccelerate growth in North America, and I'm glad you shared that slide because a few years back, and you mentioned this, as I started looking at Rimini, revenue growth was much faster than today or at the pre-pandemic because, as you stated, you were forced to narrow your sales investments based on your credit facility. If I look at the consensus fourth quarter numbers, and I assume they're right, they could be right, plus or minus, you're at about 15% year-over-year revenue growth for 2020. So with the investments in sales and marketing that you're talking about and the acceleration in North America and acceleration in application management, should the main takeaway be that you can get back to 18 to 20% organic revenue growth in the near term?
Well, I think, you can do the extrapolation from where we are today and, at $1 billion, and you'd probably come up with a CAGR over that 5-year period of around 21%. I think that when you look at where we want to go in acceleration, and we've talked about on the prior earnings calls, you look at the international growth. I mean, we have substantial growth led by Asia Pacific with that new model that we've deployed there being very effective at accelerating growth. And we've brought that model into the North American structure. So we're doing all the things that we've done internationally that have resulted in much higher accelerated growth. And that's why it's part of the strategy that we would expect that with those changes that we're making from an infrastructure, a management, a strategic execution, lot of changes in North America, all being retooled that we believe will give us the same type of growth profile that we've done internationally. The demand environment in North America is very strong. We don't have any demand issue in North America. We have, as we've said before, our execution in North America wasn't as good as it needed to be as we adjusted from this half off sale to a much bigger value proposition focused around industries, specific ways. And we looked at there in the screen that Sebastian put up, where we look at the industry, we look at the products, we look at the client specific pain points and needs. All those come together to give a unique solution. And we're bringing all of that to North America as we retool it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The crux of the question, I guess, was with all of that and appreciating that, will that be visible and you generate the fruits of those investments in 2021, or is it more likely 2022 and after?
I do think we will see the fruits of these investments in 21 because the infrastructure is already in place, the GMs are in place. The changes that we're making on the ground are not changes that will require years before they start to bear fruit. We would expect that this will impact close rates. It'll impact pipelines and building of pipelines. All of those efficiencies and execution, we believe, have immediate effect. So we would expect that this will impact our 2021 results.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Brian.
Your last question is from the line of Mark Chappell. Sir, your line's now open.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Seth, question for you. As the company continues to gain traction in the maintenance support market, could you just give us an idea of how Oracle and SAP are responding to you chipping away at their customer base? Are they lowering prices? I mean, are they improving their own support processes? What are you seeing in that area?
Well, it's a good question, Mark. We don't see much change in the world of support. In the competition of, are they going to compete with us in a 10-minute response time? Are they going to get to a 4.9 out of 5.0 type of client sat number? Frankly, we haven't seen any of that over the 15 years that we've been in business. Instead, I think you have seen a response in recent couple of years, and especially during the pandemic, much more price sensitivity. We have seen Oracle and SAP attempt to match our pricing, where they will walk in out of desperation at the end of a sales cycle where they've been unable to win and come in and say, okay, we will match Rimini Street's price. Now, we, of course, anticipate that. We build that into our sales strategy. And the reality is that even if Oracle and SAP were to match our annual fees, a client would still have to follow their upgrade paths, their mandatory migrations. They have to apply all the fixes that they want. All of these challenges that remain with their model would still come with the customer, even at the same annual fee as Rimini Street. So that's fine. We win on value. We win on long-term cost, regardless of whether they matched us in annual fees. But we have seen certainly price sensitivity by Oracle and SAP panicking. Take some of these larger deals, millions and millions of dollars that sales reps are going to lose. And we've watched them come in at the last minute and try to adjust their price down to match ours. It is an amazing thing to watch. It has not been a successful strategy for them. Occasionally, they'll disrupt a deal of ours. But against the number of transactions that we have, we're very confident in our position that head-to-head, for the same exact price, we will deliver a higher value to the client, and we will win that business.
Thank you. That's helpful. And then, Seth, in past earnings calls, you've discussed facing some COVID-related headwinds on the renewals and retention side of your business, mainly in terms of customers asking for discounts or special terms. I was wondering if you just give us an update on whether those type of customer requests are subsiding, are they constant? If you could just give us a sense of what you're seeing there.
Sure. Without tipping anything relative to fourth quarter, because we're close to earnings anyway. But I just say on a more general basis that I think the pandemic continues. One of my great concerns is the number of companies that have been weakened over the course of a year, where they thought the pandemic was only going to last a few months. They've created temporary ways to work through it. This is more of a general comment economically and globally. The pandemic going on for a year, and we have another year likely to go through this before we get back to the opportunity for normal business, especially people like movie theaters and cruise lines, hospitality, airlines. The ability for some of these very, very financially weakened companies to survive another year without any kind of aid. That's concerning. And while we've, I think, managed through this very well to date, I think that you should expect that companies are going to continue to show distress over the next year. And some of those that have been weakened in the first year of the pandemic may not survive the second. So we always have to worry about that for some of our clients. And I think that's just no different than any other company who has the same exact clients that we do, whether those companies will survive or not. And I just think that's a risk we manage. And I think you look at the way we built cash, you saw our Q3 number. We're carrying more cash than we've ever had in the company's history. We did that early on. We built our reserves so that we could help clients with potentially in-house financing to give them some ability with cash flow. And that's helped us win deals as well for companies that were in trouble. And because of our financial strength, we're able to offer those things that, of course, even our smaller competitors don't carry anywhere near, that we have more cash in the bank, multiples of their revenue. And that allows us flexibility. And we're using that flexibility because we saw the need early on. We built the cash, and now we're putting it to good work.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question. It has to do with your security offering. And you touched on it today. It's relatively new. I was wondering if you could just give more details around the offering with respect to what type of services you're providing with the security offering. And then also, is it generally available today?
Sure. It is generally available, and we have two particular security products. One of them is our advanced database security, which is very innovative. It's, we believe, the best in the world in terms of being able to provide service and protection against an evolving threat environment for advanced database controls. And at the same time, we also have our advanced application and middleware security. Both these solutions are in place. They're generating several $1 million already in revenue. And I know they're the least known products out of the Rimini Street world, and that's going to change in 2021. You're going to hear more about them because we have very large companies using these products. They're based on other companies' work in the security field, such as McAfee and some of the other companies we work with. And these products allow us to respond to an emergency situation of a new threat analysis and discovery in a matter of hours, where the traditional software vendor patch process could take a company a year to go through all the testing that needs to be done and before it can be deployed in production. So we can respond in hours against potentially a year on the course of the old vendor product in terms of patching model. So these are great technologies. You'll hear more about them, and more companies within Rimini Street's client base are deploying them. And we believe these will, when you look at the size of our database environments, when we have companies running hundreds and thousands of database instances, our products will provide support across all of them, whether they're Oracle databases, IBM DB2, SQL Server, open source products, and even the SAP Sybase and HANA products. So we can cover the full landscape of databases with our protection schemes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There
I
are no
think
further
we're
questions.
over our
Presenters,
time, Dean. So I think we're going to have to probably bring this to an end, and we'll look to be able to respond to written questions that we weren't able to get to, and Dean will handle that process. So with that, Dean, let's go ahead and again thank you everybody for joining us today, and we really appreciate it. Hope this was a valuable first Rimini Street Investor Day, and we look forward to future days and talking to many of you in one-on-one meetings as we come up to earnings for the fourth quarter in fiscal year 20. So thank you everybody for joining us today.